Hello, hello, hello. We are super excited to be here for a really special town hall tonight on a topic that has been requested a lot in all of the questions that have been coming in. So thank you all so much for being here, whether you're live or tuning in later. And we're so excited to dive into all sorts of questions and content tonight and all of the things. We usually like to ask a question at the beginning as folks are coming in, just to let folks come in, get settled. So I would love to ask anyone in the comments if you did anything fun for Halloween last night. And while folks are coming in, I'll ask our panelists, feel free to jump in if y'all had any fun family Halloween or any Halloween extravaganzas.
Caryn, did you go out? I know I just have a huge neighborhood. My neighborhood is like the trick-or-treating neighborhood. So I bought I think it was 400 pieces of candy and we were out in 3 hours, running away from our front doorstep because we felt so badly. We didn't have enough candy, but it was the best thing in the world to watch all of the different costumes, some very creative costumes this year. A lot of Stranger Things, fan costumes, which were really cool.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I just handed out candy. It rained in my neighborhood, so that was kind of a bummer too. But it was nice though. You have a lot of candy left over, actually.
So my son is watching right now, my little 4.5-year-old, so he doesn't have any idea.
Oh, Jenna, you froze.
Oh no.
Oh no.
It's better. We'll get the tech glitches out of the way at the beginning.
That's okay. Yeah, totally good. I'm sure we will. Let's see. Yeah, Jenna, we'll when you loop back on, we will be really excited to hear the continuation of the Halloween saga. So while we wait on that, yes, Jenna's frozen, but I love in the chat, Dawn, you dressed up as yourself. Some folks Halloween parties. Love it. I know I got to go to a haunted house last night with some other folks in the OCD community and did the whole leaning into your fears and having fun anyway, which was super fun. And that's the same kind of thing that we're going to be asking y'all to do today as we engage in a conversation about something that's kind of tricky, but also really important. So to introduce our awesome folks here, this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/findhelp to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you're in a crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access this online at www.988lifeline.org. And finally, we want to create as safe a space as possible. And we want to be kind and respectful to everyone in the chat. And then folks also watching later on. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. I do want to note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and it's being recorded. So please keep that in mind as you comment. But we really just want you to be you and share your experience, ask questions, and engage in this conversation. And I always like to remind you that anyone who comments tonight, you are advocating and you are raising awareness and you are a part of this dialogue. And we are so glad that you're here. So to get into our awesome panelists tonight, I will loop back to Jenna to see if she comes back in before I announce her. But we have Carly, who is a licensed mental health counselor and therapist and clinical advisor at NOCD. Carly has been working with individuals suffering from anxiety disorders and OCD-related disorders since 2013, primarily in inpatient and intensive outpatient settings, and then joined the NOCD community in early 2021. Carly is CCATP certified, and other areas of interest and specialization have included expressive therapy, mindfulness, and positive psychology. And you can also find Carly on Instagram on her awesome account, which now I'm blanking. I should have written the name.
You're good. Counseling with Carly.
Counseling with Carly.
Not on always all the time, but thank you. That's very sweet, especially coming from you because I love your account.
Yeah, I think you're awesome. So whenever you do, it's lovely. So thank you. And then we have Caryn, who is a licensed professional counselor for Beyond Borders CBT and also provides direct clinical services for individuals with OCD, BFRBs, tic disorders, and anxiety. In addition to clinical work, Caryn provides one-to-one consultations with therapists new to treating OCD and supervises pre-licensed therapists in Pennsylvania. She formerly worked as a therapist at Rogers Behavioral Health in their OCD and anxiety disorders PHP and IOP programs. She's a member of the OCD Pennsylvania affiliate and has presented at IOCDF conference in the past, along with guest speaking in local university counseling courses and group supervision sessions. And Caryn, we are so excited that you're here. And feel free if you want to share your Instagram as well.
Oh yeah, it's just at therapist.Caryn, like my Caryn. That's my Instagram. So
yeah, and awesome content too. And then we have Jenna, who has joined us again. We are so glad that she's
I'm afraid
back.
to say anything because I don't want to get kicked out again. I don't know what happened, but I'm back.
Well, we're glad you're here. I'm going to read your bio, so it's perfect timing. So Jenna is a licensed professional counselor and the director of clinical marketing at OCD. She's been working with individuals who have OCD, anxiety, and related conditions since 2008. Her work includes several years at the residential level of care, as well as intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, and outpatient levels. She's contributed to research on hoarding, dropout from residential OCD recovery programs, and relief experiences in OCD. She is also the host of the podcast, All the Hard Things, which focuses on OCD, ERP, postpartum, and related concepts. And Jenna also has a super active Instagram, which I think is just Jenna.Overbaugh, right?
Yep. So it's just my name with a little dot in the middle.
Mm-hmm. So awesome. So lots of great places to connect with everyone here. And for anyone that I don't know, I am Reverend Katie O'Dunn. Katie is perfectly fine. I always just like to put the ministry title so folks know that clergy do in fact have OCD and that there is no shame around being a faith leader who seeks clinical mental health treatment. So all about that. I serve as a lead advocate for the IOCDF, leading all things faith and OCD, and especially love getting to lead these events with awesome panelists like this and with all of you. So we're going to go ahead and dive into this really exciting topic tonight on relationships and OCD, and maybe a way that we don't often talk about. And I would love to just start by asking, when we talk about ROCD or relationship OCD, what is that? What obsessions and compulsions might show up? When we're naming that, what does that look like? So Carly, I'll go ahead and toss it to you first. No pressure.
Yeah. Right. I'm like, all right, ready to go for it. So it's like what most people think of with our OCD is relationship focused OCD. So this can be most particularly to romantic relationships. We're going to like add to that in a bit, but that's what most people think of specifically. So they think of romantic relationships, significant partner. Sometimes it can also relate to like ex relationships, romantic relationships too. But again, encompassing most of the time people consider romantic relationships. And so what we've tried to sort of broaden the scope with that is to bring into reality that there are many kinds of relationships that OCD can latch on to. But yeah, traditionally it's romantic.
Yeah. And I love that we're kind of doing something a little bit different here tonight. So I wonder, what are some issues with the assumption that ROCD is just in romantic relationships? How does this come up? Why might that be problematic? I wonder what that might look like. So I guess, Caryn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think when people feel like they don't fit into different subtypes or they don't really see their experiences talked about, especially in the context of OCD, they might not realize that what they're dealing with is OCD, or they might feel like, oh, well, like maybe treatment won't work for me because I don't have, what other people have. And that kind of leads to like a larger discussion about subtypes and how I think sometimes subtypes are a really helpful way for people to realize what's going on and for them to kind of get into treatment. But then like on the flip side or the other side of that coin is like, what if it's just a different presentation, right? There's so many nuances to this experience. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's also like, it's super important to to talk about OCD and like all of its different manifestations. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I do think it's so helpful as people are getting diagnosed or finding community to say like, oh, okay, that what if resonates with me and I'm not alone. I know that was my experience with things related to harm in particular, where it was like, oh, wow, okay, there's other people who are experiencing this, or for me, moral scrup or religious scrup.
Right.
But it's all OCD. And sometimes we forget that. I always tell folks it's like different gross flavors of the same kind of nasty ice cream. It just it's on different forms. So Jenna, I mean, I wonder, how do we maybe broaden our understanding of OCD themes and what OCD is versus what a theme is? And how do we separate that out?
Yeah, so this all came about because a long time ago, we had someone, it was a thought leader in the field, and I still to this day have not gotten the courage to I don't want to go back and see who it was, because I don't want to be jaded or tainted about this person. But this person came and they did a really awesome talk for us on relationship OCD, and all of the examples, as what we often experience online, they were all romantic. And so at the end of the presentation, I asked, what about these non-conventional kind of expressions of relationship OCD? From my experience, I think I dealt with relationship OCD a lot with my son, really obsessing and compulsing about the integrity of our relationship. And my husband's watching right now, and he'll be able to 100% vouch for the fact that I'm constantly wondering, about how Eli will be when he's 57 years old, and what our relationship will be like when we're super old. And, as though what I'm listening to on the radio on the way home from daycare will somehow affect the integrity of our relationship 30 or 40 years down the line. And this person, so I asked that question, and this person, a god in my mind, said that, oh yeah, relationship OCD is usually just romantic relationships. If it is some other relationship, then it would probably be something else. And that something else is probably, I think, from the research that we've done, it ends up being a lot of attachment style issues, or personality disorders as it relates to attachment and relationships. And I didn't like that. That didn't sit well with me, because it's why? Why not? We don't say that contamination OCD is just for blood or just for bodily fluids. It's about what it's about. It's about the fear. And so, I think that, when we did this presentation, we looked up, what is the definition of a relationship? And dictionary.com and thesaurus.com and all these basic places all said that the definition of a relationship could be anything. It's literally the connection that exists between someone or something and someone or something. And the examples that they give are uncles, pets, relationship to places, right? But interestingly enough, I was okay, where do people go when they think they have OCD, or they're just starting out, right? They probably go to Google WebMD and probably the IOCDF. So what are their definitions? And their definitions are all romantic. And we can't have that. We can't have the literal definition of relationship OCD, or relationship rather, be all these different things, to animals, to uncles, to our Amazon delivery guy, whatever. And then just, only say that, oh, yeah, you only qualify as being troubled, if this is happening in a romantic relationship. So yeah, I think in general, it's good to broaden out and to realize what OCD actually is. It's obsessions, it's compulsions, it's a difficulty sitting with uncertainty. And there's nothing that legitimately should say, if we're checking all the other boxes of what OCD is, obsessions, compulsions, distress, and impairment, and not better explained by another condition, I don't care what it's about. I don't care what the content is about.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to, don't actually tell me, because I don't want to know, but who that was, because I'm sitting
I did go back. I won't say I'm here.
Okay, I'm curious, but also not, because it's so opposite of, we're giving, I don't know, we're giving power to the content too when we do that, where the content is totally irrelevant. It's just OCD's latching on to whatever happens to be the most significant to us at that point in our life. And to your point, Jenna, that might be the Amazon guy coming to my house And
look, why not? That's what I wanted to say. And I think I said this in our presentation, like, why not? And I said, like, I wasn't courageous enough then to ask that question, so I never did, but we're courageous enough now. So here we go.
Y'all are super courageous, and I already see folks resonating in the chat, and I will do my best for us to get to all the questions that start to come in. So I would encourage y'all, if you have specific questions about ROCD. Oh, and Jenna, you are getting
look at Eli.
Eli is rooting on mom. But if y'all have questions about ROCD, please put them in the chat, because we want this to be about the things that y'all really want to know, especially because this is a topic that's often under discussed. So, I mean, we started to get into the fact, and Jenna, you highlighted some of them, but I'd love to just throw this out to the group and kind of piggyback on each other. Or what are some examples of ways that relationship OCD can show up, not in romantic relationships, maybe in other types of relationships? What might that look like? What are some obsessions and compulsions that you might have seen? What are those types of relationships?
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Carly.
I mean, so when Jenna, I think, was the first one that reached out to me on this before the three of us linked up and decided we were going to do this as a presentation. I was like, yeah, because I thought of like 3 people in particular that I was working with, and pets was a big thing for them. Like, our pets are, for many of us, like our babies, or just like this incredibly important relationship again in our life. And so one of the things, going back to the question you asked, Caryn, like, what can this inhibit, or like, what does this get in the way of? There were a couple of people in that subgroup that I was thinking of that didn't immediately come to me and say, hey, I'm obsessing over this, this, and this. It was like through the process of other thematic work that we were doing that I was like, what's up with that checking behavior? And that looks like some researching, but it was in relation to their pet. And so I think that this again goes to show that, like, it's important to broaden the relationship to relationship OCD and recognize that relationships are varied, because it might actually cause a person to not bring up really vital information for their ERP therapist. And that obviously is not going to help us build the best treatment plan for them. But then second to that, yeah, pets was the first thing that came to mind for me. And I think that people often feel kind of like silly for feeling that way. And that to me was also really kind of like heart-wrenching, because I think anyone who's had like a pet that they absolutely adore and love knows how deep that love runs. And so that's a lot of really great material for OCD. It's a lot of value bank for OCD. So you can imagine that the compulsions are just as significant as if it was with a significant other. So checking behaviors, researching, reassurance seeking. I mean, you name it, what you see elsewhere in OCD, it's exactly what you see in a relationship like that. I know Jenna and Caryn probably have other relationships, but that was the first thing that when I got pulled into this conversation, I was like, yes, I want to talk about this.
And I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, the pet thing, and I can even think about this. My cats are like outside the door right now. And anyone who's watched live streams with me or Ethan know they generally make an appearance, whether it's Bonnie licking her butt or anything else that everyone on these streams has seen. But it's tough when they're the most significant thing to you. And for a long time before I knew I had OCD with pets, that was such a hard thing, where it was, well, why am I having these thoughts? Why am I so concerned that I could potentially be harmful to my pets? And it's like, no, they're literally the most important thing to you.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention that you're also in that moment maybe not characterizing that as OCD because it doesn't fit in the perfect box, and maybe we're not using our ERP and we are giving too much attention to those thoughts. Yeah, no, it's an important relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think there are two. Like, sorry.
Go ahead, Jenna.
I think there are like 2 buckets. So I think we can agree, and I think we do. Like, I think I've seen this on the IOCDF website, like that there are 2 different kinds of obsessions, and someone can certainly have one or the other or both. But you can obsess over the integrity of the relationship, like the 2 things or the 2 people together. Or you can also obsess about the person, right? So like in a romantic sense, we often see this as like, is my partner attractive enough? Like I work with a lot of people, like if they get a picture of their romantic partner and it like they have that thought or that feeling that we all do, right? Like we all think that every once in a while, right? We're human. That like, oh, that was a bad picture. And then they obsess over that, right? But I think, Carly, you even had an example about a pet, like that someone was obsessive about the dog that they adopted, and like it was very ego dystonic, it was very unwanted,
Yep.
and they ended up like almost like giving it back and surrendering it. So, and then there's also obsessiveness about the integrity of the relationship, right? Like, example of that would be, again, like with my son, and I see someone in the comments saying like, yes, mother and son, like, again, obsessiveness about the integrity of the relationship. I can see this playing out with siblings for sure, like about worrying about the integrity of the relationship, either in the future or now in the moment, definitely between like parent and child, or child and parent. Again, with pets, like Caryn mentioned, I worked with someone who was obsessive about the relationship, like the integrity of the relationship between themselves and a celebrity that they had obviously never met. And they knew that it was like wild. And I know that it sounds crazy, but I feel like this celebrity gave me so much because of their work that I feel like I have to give back to them. Or I feel like if I do something, then that will somehow negatively affect this celebrity. And it's like, again, it doesn't matter, right? Like, we're just trying to get to the core of what's going on and develop exposures and get the person back to living a healthy life. But I cut Caryn off, so I'll give it back to Caryn.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, because also like when you, as soon as you said celebrity, I'm sure like other mental health professionals too, like maybe like delusional disorder, right? Like there's so many other kind of quick go-tos that might come to mind if you're not seeing things from like a really functional kind of like thinking about like, okay, like, well, what is it actually below the surface? And so, yeah, what I was going to say earlier was just more so about, it doesn't have to be like between people, right? It could be like a relationship between like somebody and their college major or their job, right? Think about all the people dealing with like life transitions. Like I see all the time in different like Facebook groups looking for referrals. Like I need a therapist for a young adult dealing with anxiety about life transitions. And I'm always like, well, what is the anxiety about? Like, so much of like indecisiveness, right? If you were to replace like, am I in the right field am I with the right person, right? It kind of could be the same, right? Oh, we lost Jenna.
She was so excited about your great point. She just couldn't.
I gotta go.
Gotta go.
I don't know what's going on, but yeah, it could really be. I mean, I've seen it so much with like, I don't know if I'm in the right field, or I don't know if I'm making the right decision. And then similarly to people who break up with their partners because they're not sure if it's the right person, right? Like some people are just, they might avoid taking any steps at all because what if it's not the right one? So, and you could see like when you frame it like that person could probably spend years in general talk therapy trying to figure out the roots of their indecisiveness or like, all that kind of stuff when, I'd be curious what would happen if it was ERP.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a great transition. I wanted to ask what, for folks listening, does the treatment look like for ROCD? And we know treatment for, and if folks don't know, as you're listening, the gold standard treatment for OCD is exposure and response prevention. But I wonder, for anyone who might not be familiar with that, if we can share a little bit about what ERP is, but also specifically how that might be applied in this particular case with ROCD. So Carly, go ahead. I know you're ready to jump in here.
So ERP at large, exposure response therapy. I think, right, we said we're going to do a little bit of a brief overview of that and then talk. Yeah. Okay. So making sure I've got my bullet points in my brain all in the right places. So ERP at large is, again, the golden standard treatment of OCD, and it involves exposing yourself to the themes/fears that your OCD is tagged onto with the goal to change your response. So that's the response prevention. In doing so, you create kind of, I always refer to it as a muscle. You're creating a callus in a muscle that increases your tolerance of that discomfort. It's really brave work. It's super brave work. I truly think it's a spiritual form of therapy too, because you're really learning how to be with yourself through really difficult moments, which in itself is just like very that's a life focus, let alone just an OCD focus. So with our OCD, specific to non-traditional, but really with any format, this is why it's so important that people feel comfortable to discuss the various kinds of relationships in their life. And Caryn, when you brought up how someone might be misdiagnosed or maybe not even like seek out that form of treatment. I mean, I've seen that. I've had those individuals in my therapy session. I almost said therapy room, but Zoom room. And it's heartbreaking because you hear about these people who have been dealing with the same kinds of relationship troubles, not necessarily romantic, but relationship troubles for years and years and years, and just never understanding what was getting in their way to be able to move forward, make a decision, find a commitment. So again, it's really helpful and important when you're working with your exposure response therapist, specialized exposure response therapist, that you are working with them to collaborate on what are some of the core fears relevant. What are the relationships? Caryn mentioned the function of that. That's a huge part of the detective work you're doing, is working with your therapist to recognize the functioning of these fears, what the fear is, the feared consequence. And then through that process, you're going to build what we call a hierarchy, a fear ladder. This is essentially your treatment plan. And work on exposures that start small, work your way up, build that confidence. But it's really dependent on that relationship with your ERP therapist and you guys kind of getting into the muck of it for a bit and talking a lot about what these different variables look like so you can build those exposures.
Yeah. And I guess like just I guess just to kind of like clarify what exposures are, because I think sometimes we like kind of take for granted that people know what that means. But so like I always say like, okay, so exposures are basically just exercises or actions that people engage in to purposely bring on that doubt, that uncertainty, that, all of the questions that might trigger them to want to do compulsions. And then that's where the response prevention comes in, where then, they intentionally practice resisting or preventing the response that they typically would have, which would be their compulsions or their safety behaviors of some sort. And I can get into I could talk for a long time about like why that works or how that works, depending on like the different perspectives or theories or underpinnings. But essentially, right, it's just gives you a chance to experience that distress doesn't last as long as you might have thought it would, that it's not as intolerable as maybe you thought it would be. That you don't need compulsions to cope with them, things like that. So
no, Caryn, I think that's so huge. And for folks really, because we say the word exposure all the time when we talk about that, there's this question of, what does that actually mean? And I always like folks to know, we get that it's really scary to ask you to lean into the things that really terrify you. But here's the really great thing about this treatment with folks like Caryn and Carly and other ERP specialists is they get to work with you to really build that hierarchy so that you can reclaim your life. And to Carly's point, I haven't heard anyone else define it like this. I always tell folks ERP is a spiritual practice, and it very much is. And I think it helps you break down the OCD so you can get back to your life in a value-driven way, whether that's in accordance with your faith or with your relationships or any of those other things. So I wonder, Caryn, if I know you said there's so much you could talk about with ERP. I wonder if you could give us some examples in the relationship realm.
Sure.
If there was a particular client maybe who came in with a relationship that wasn't a romantic relationship, what are some examples of exposures that might come up?
Right. Yeah. I guess like, talking about like a parent and a child and worrying that maybe they don't, maybe the quality of their relationship is not, they might worry that the quality of their relationship has somehow changed or is somehow not like the right kind of love or unconditional love that a parent should have. Sometimes the exposures might be to purposely think about times where they got annoyed at their child, right? Similar to how maybe for somebody with like romantic relationship obsessions, right, might think of like purposely stare at a photo of their partner and identify the flaws. And then the response prevention might be to purposely spend time with the object of their obsessions, and make plans for the future and really kind of commit to that relationship. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, anything that can bring on that question that just like nags at them. That's what we want to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Caryn. Yeah, and Carly, I wonder if any immediate examples pop up for you from cases or any exposures that you've worked on with folks around relationships.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of using imaginal exposures, using different creative mediums to be able to, especially with relationships, well, really actually for anything, get at the core fear, but also really visualize, imagine yourself being in that space. So, I mean, this could look like anything from drawing a picture of yourself separate from the person or thing. So for instance, I'm thinking about one particular case with a person's cat who was kind of unwell. The cat was older. And so there was this big fear around the integrity of the relationship. Is the cat happy enough? Am I doing enough for the cat? As well as really kind of that, am I doing everything right? I want to make sure nothing bad happens to this cat and therefore my relationship. And so what we did was we drew pictures of this individual in a separate room from the cat with the door closed. So this idea of like being separated, unable to check on the cat, that was a big compulsion we were working on, like checking on the cat. And it sounds like completely out there. Like, how is drawing a picture of something like that going to bring forward an exposure experience? It does. We're very visual, many of us, but I would say the majority of us human beings, that when we externalize the OCD content, when we really get it outside of ourselves, whether it be by scripts or we're doing it in a creative fashion, like an imaginal, like I'm suggesting, the brain is still working really, really, really hard in a threat response. But it also helps build the comfort level to start doing some more in vivo, in person, concrete exposures too. So for this individual in particular, we worked on with researching in particular, like researching or limiting the research, but also working on sitting with the discomfort of maybe you are doing the right thing by your cat. Maybe you're not. Maybe the cat is actually happy with you. Maybe you're not. So yeah, it can range from like a very creative, out there, abstract looking exposure, which they are so helpful. And then also like very concrete, straightforward, really working that maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like to go back to the example of like, what if I choose the wrong job, right? It could be super concrete, like, yeah, we're going to spend 20 minutes sending your resume out, right? Like very, very direct types of things. Or like, let me make plans to go on these interviews, or like, let me look at these colleges online and just kind of check them out. It could be something as straightforward as that. Yeah.
I really love that you're pulling in that job piece. And I actually, before tonight, hadn't really thought about that along the lines of relationship OCD, because again, we hear it so often in the terms of romantic relationships, and it makes so much sense what you're talking about. So I want to go to, at 7:08, Dr. Aurelius asked a question. It said, my ROCD has been present since I started dating. How do you determine what is ROCD versus just being super selective? And it's such a great question, but I think we can also expand it into whether we're talking about a job or a school or anything else. What's ROCD versus being really selective about the job that we pick?
Ooh, I have like the first word that comes to my mind is dysfunction. Is it causing dysfunction in your life? Are you really finding that when it comes to, again, romantic partners, jobs? The other relationship that's coming to mind for me, Caryn, I feel like we've talked about this before too, is like bosses, therapists. I mean, these are relationships that people have high value banks for. And so it's common for OCD to tag on to that and wanting to make sure that the integrity of the relationship is good. Am I giving enough? So I always go back to, rather than getting really lost in the sauce about, oh, wait, am I just like kind of really selective, or do I just have like a very set of standards? okay, sure, that may be true, but how much time are you spending thinking about this thing? How many behaviors, mental or physical, do you have to go through to sort of go through the merry-go-round of, is this right or not right for me? So I'm constantly, again, kind of looking for the functioning of behavior. And if it's dysfunctional, if it's getting in the way of your life and then it's causing you immense distress, those are really clear indicators that there is a process error happening. Because I'm super selective about lots of things, but I kind of, work through that moment without going into an obsessional state or feeling like I have to do compulsions to feel at ease enough to make a decision. And that would be the clear difference. That would be sort of the line in the sand per se.
Sure. Yeah, when you said processing error, it made me think of like these really common kinds of like maladaptive beliefs that you find across subtypes of OCD. And really like, also to kind of go transdiagnostically, like in really common in anxiety disorders too, right? So like overestimation of threat, overestimation of control, perfectionism, like the belief that your thoughts, and feelings should always be perfect or controlled in some way, and intolerance of uncertainty. If you find that that's kind of present and it's kind of like that, like those like unrelenting types of standards, right? Like to the point where maybe there's connections being made that like other people wouldn't make, right? Like, oh, well, this person smiled funny at like the server, and that's an indication that they have like poor moral values or don't respect XYZ, right? Like that catastrophic thinking, right? Like that might be
that's my OCD. That's not like the actual reality.
right. Yeah, I mean, like it's like, okay, like I think like people with anxiety tend to make connections where like maybe there just aren't any, right? Or like there's like, okay, well, like I didn't get the vibes were off, right? Or like my therapist smiled slightly when I told them this, so that means they just don't understand me, right? It's like, well, no, okay, let's pause, right? And so I think there's standards and there's selections and having kind of like deal breakers in relationships of all kinds, and then there's sort of like seeing things and interpreting things from a distorted lens in that sense. So that's sort of how I kind of see it. Like whenever I'm kind of like, oh, is this OCD or is this not? Like, I'm like, okay, like, are there these kinds of like tenets of OCD that are present? Because not all uncertainty in relationships is OCD. And I think that's also equally important to point out.
I love that you pulled in the maladaptive beliefs. I think that's so key. And I know you mentioned that and explained it a little bit for folks listening who are like, what's a maladaptive belief? I wonder if you could define that a little bit more and give us some more examples so that folks can understand that a little bit further.
Yeah. I mean, I think like when I think of maladaptive beliefs, I sort of think of them almost as like, like on Instagram where there's filters and it's sort of, or like modes, right? Like it's sort of like the way that it kind of shapes and paints everything and like how you perceive things and interpret them and experience them. And they're common, it's not just an OCD thing, but especially in OCD, like those are the ones that we kind of see pretty frequently.
They're super hooked up to our fear response. So OCD obviously being really, really activated by the fear response, it's really common that they're going to be there. And so you hear a lot about like catastrophic thinking. You hear about like negating the positive. You hear about minimizing, maximizing, all those different types of things. And they all, like Caryn said, they're kind of these filters that I always imagine like the fear response turns on. It's like these certain blinders come on. And so going back to your point, Caryn, like your brain wants to make associations quick. It wants to identify the threat and create a solution instantaneously. And if it can't do that clearly in the moment, because OCD is tagging on to things that there isn't inherently a threat with, it will come up with stuff. That's where compulsions come in. That's where rituals come in. That's the solution in that moment. But then those distortions can, of course, be the driver to that space, to the compulsive space.
Right. Yeah. And I think like one of the other things is like there's also kind of the excessive monitoring of internal and external feedback, or like over reliance on these types of things, sort of like that's why like I think like saying like trust your gut can be so tricky with people. It's like, well, like I can't, how am I supposed to trust my gut? Always saying that there's something wrong, right? But yeah, kind of just like almost gauging and measuring like how good is this relationship solely based on how it feels in that moment. Like that's a really common thing for relationship OCD, both like romantic and non-romantic.
And I know folks on these streams hear us all the time say feelings aren't facts. And we know that that's hard because feelings feel like facts. But if you find yourself saying, well, I feel like this must be true, or I felt a little bit off in this interaction, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something. And Caryn, to your point, that's so hard because we are told throughout our lives and throughout society, we'll trust your gut. And that's not necessarily how it works.
Right.
I always bring up when I'm trying to bring attention to how our body exerts feelings. Exerts might not be the right word, although it does feel that way sometimes. So our body has this like crazy ability to feel and emote through moments, but it is only capable of feeling and emoting through the current moment. That's like, I always kind of come back to that and go, wow, that's so cool that like we are innately actually quite grounded. And it's this 8-pound bowling ball up here that gets like really ahead of the game. But we are only feeling what's happening in this moment, but that is also internally or externally. So that's your thoughts. That is how much we're engaging in negative, futuristic fears or obsessions. That discomfort you're feeling is your body responding to the fact that you are engaging with really tough material, and your body's doing its job at saying, this is really scary. This is really uncomfortable, but it's not a fact. It's not inherently danger. The example I always give in session is if I'm working with a person and they're really afraid of stoves, like they have a deep fear that they could cause like some kind of fire, and I have them stand next to a stove. They haven't touched the stove. No one has turned a burner on. They haven't even looked at it. And they're feeling so much discomfort in that moment. Is it the stove? And my clients look at me like kind of sideways. Well, like, yeah, it's clearly a stove. And I was like, it's the thought of the stove. They haven't touched it. They haven't looked at it. Nothing has happened with it. Their emotions in that moment is a response to the fact that their thoughts are so enthralled with fear. So if we can ground into that and recognize that our bodies are just doing their job, it's letting us know in a moment if it's tough, if it's exciting, if it's boring, if it's somewhere in the middle of all those things, and ground into that present moment versus where our minds, particularly what OCD wants us to get to, which is in the catastrophic doom sphere. We can be a little bit more, I think, forgiving of our feelings too, a little bit more accepting of the discomfort, recognizing it as like really cool that our body is capable. I don't know if everyone would agree with me with that, but I think it's really cool that our bodies are capable of letting us know what we like and dislike.
Well, and it's such a cool approach. I think probably a lot of folks I work with hate that I do this, but I've learned a lot from Shalin Isley, who's very big into like, yes, I got an intrusive thought. So everybody I work with, like we stand up and go, yes, I'm anxious. I have an intrusive thought. What an awesome opportunity to make my OCD smaller today. And there's really something to that approach of celebrating like, oh, I had this kind of stress reaction, but also I get to choose how I respond to that in this moment.
Yes, that's so empowering, because having the stress response and being able to A, identify it as that, and then B, go, ooh, and I get to choose what I'm going to do with it now. Like that's a really exciting thing. And that's, what I try to get people excited about in ERP care is that that's recovery. It's not an elimination. It is that like you have a choice in the matter. Now you're not just constantly kind of running that race with OCD anymore, because you're cool just taking a walk instead.
Totally. Very very acceptance and commitment therapy. Well, I guess it is not ask, it just is. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I guess people in the chat somebody was like, "Where's Jenna?" So Jenna is having Wi-Fi issues. I don't know what's going on. I think she's probably frantically trying to resolve that. So.
Trying to figure it out behind the scenes. So we hope we get her back. But if we don't, we have some other awesome folks who I know we have lots of questions for. And I know we're going to get into some of y'all asked some specific relationship questions. But before that, I wanted to just piggybacking on what Carly just said. Caryn, I wanted to ask you, I mean, what does then recovery look like for ROCD? I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean we don't have any questions or doubts or intrusive thoughts ever again? I don't know. What does recovery look like?
Yeah. I mean, I always say like one of the most beautiful things I've ever like read, not to get like cheesy, but like I forget who wrote it. It was like a quote from some author basically saying like, you know, like love is a risk, like marriage doesn't make sense, right? And I guess like, you know, if you wanted to extend it, like having kids doesn't really make sense. Doing anything, like walking outside your door doesn't really make sense, right? Not to get too philosophical here, but like life is a risk, right? And so I think it's like, you know, like when you go to a wedding and they exchange vows, like nobody knows what's going to happen, right? In the next 5 minutes, 1 day, 1 year, 1 decade, right? And yet people do it all the time, but nobody knows, right? Like nobody knows unless you're like Biff from Back to the Future. That's a very niche reference, but like, yeah, like nobody knows, right? But like we do it anyway. And I think that's what recovery looks like for especially relationship OCD, where, you know, like to kind of talk about like what Jenna was saying earlier about her relationship with her son, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, myself included, like that, I resonate with that because I would have those fears too of like, I'm going to mess my kid up because I am not fit to be a mom. I'm going to just screw him up, right? Like every time I am tired and I want to take a nap instead of playing with him, like that's what he's going to remember and go to therapy for, right? Or like I'm going to screw him up because I lost my temper once, right? Things that are kind of like universal for parents, you know? And so like there are moments where like I just would avoid spending time with him, you know, like I was able to because I have like a great partner, but like I would just be like, oh no, I can't even deal with it, right? And so I think for that, like recovery looks like, okay, well, like maybe I'm gonna lose my temper, but yeah, like let's play. Like no, you can go away for the weekend and I have it covered. And regardless of what's gonna happen, maybe my kid's gonna end up in therapy because of me, but like maybe not. And like he's definitely going to if I just avoid, right? And so it's sort of like trusting that life is uncertain and like appreciating that like that can mean anything, including the good things, right? Like this new job that I don't know if I am into, right? Like this career field that I've agonized over, right? Maybe it is the wrong decision. Maybe there is like a sliding doors effect of like, oh, I should have chosen that job. But also like, what's the other option? It's to like not do anything, right? Like that's not the life I want. So it can go either way, or like, you know, maybe like if I have a child where I'm worried that I don't love them anymore because, you know, like I feel angry at them sometimes, or I have those doubts. Like if I were to just give up custody, then I would lose them forever. And like, what is that really what I want? Is because that's comfortable. That does away with all of the uncertainty, but does it do anything else for me? You know? So yay.
I love that. And to respond as welcome back, Jenna. So as Jenna reorients, Caryn, that's such I love the bringing up the beautiful part of uncertainty.
I'm very clearly trying here, you guys. Like I went to the hotel lobby.
We are glad you're here. So I love bringing up that beautiful part of uncertainty too, because with OCD we automatically think uncertainty means the worst thing ever is going to happen, and I mean, to your point too, I mean, the only thing really that we're certain about in this moment is that if we continue to engage in compulsions, if we continue to engage in what we're doing, we're going to get sicker. We're going to move away from those that we love and care about in any of our relationships. But it's by leaning into the uncertainty. It's by leaning into the what if that we have a shot at a beautiful life and a beautiful relationship with those that we care about. And I don't know, I always like to think it's kind of worth the risk, right?
Totally. Yeah.
1000%. Yeah, it's like uncertainty. The definition of uncertainty is to literally not know. And I'm like, OCD is such a hypocrite because it says that it's just doom. Like it's not fair playing. Like at the end of the day, uncertainty is truly the unknown. And so a lot of that is going to be great. A lot of it's going to be boring. I can't tell you how many times I've worked in exposure with someone and they're like, it really, not only was it not that bad, it was truly boring, not all that interesting. It just goes to show what a manipulative, I always call it, I work with a lot of kids. So you'll see me slip in kid language, a little bugger, a little bully, like what it is. Seeking attention is trying to keep your attention. It's going to do that by letting you know, or by telling you that uncertainty leads to doom.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Carly. Well, to get into some of our questions here, we actually have Carly at 7:35 who asks, what are the overlaps between ROCD and attachment style? And I think this is, Carly, you look excited about this question. So go ahead.
There are not many Carlys out there. I don't always get to like meet other Carlys. You spell it really cool too. Oh, cool. I love that question too. That's actually a lot of what I spoke about in the presentation. So what is the overlaps between ROCD and attachment style? So anyone that's unfamiliar with attachment style, this is sort of another form of therapy, another conceptual, philosophical therapy lens. Attachment is how a person attaches in their relationships at large. So I focused in the presentation on sort of the overlapping factors, the differential diagnosis. Oh no.
We are uncertain how Jenna's internet is going to work out, but we're going to lean in.
Okay, back to it. Sorry, that caught my attention really hard. So attachment styles are all about how we feel secure within a relationship. Probably the easiest, best word to use in that reference. And so one of the things that I said, and this came up in relationship to trauma too. How do I know it's not trauma or attachment or X number of Z other things? You might not know. It could be both. And so that's the difficult thing, is to recognize that there is a chance that you are experiencing some insecure attachment stuff that is from earlier relationships, foundational relationships. Trauma could play a card in how you perceive relationships. I mean, all those things can be true, but the cool thing is that if you are working through ROCD or any form of OCD with your ERP therapist, you're also going to be able to differentiate. I think someone noted, so my background is in trauma and crisis intervention. So I saw someone note that it's really difficult to do ERP work with therapists who aren't trauma informed. I would agree, but ERP therapists are meant to do ERP therapy, and therapists at large, what we are meant to also do is assess and suss out if you need that added care elsewhere. So in this case, what are the overlaps and what do we do about it? So anxious attachment is what most people think about. This is when someone feels insecure in their attachments. And so they might anxiously move towards or anxiously respond to certain relationships. This can sound very, of course, similar to ROCD because there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of insecurity around certainty in the relationships. What do I do if I have both? Well, if you know you have OCD, work through your ERP. And then also we got to lean into the uncertainty that, you might focus on that first and have to focus on attachment style second. And maybe that's not the right choice. Maybe it is. But at the end of the day, if you know that you are dealing with OCD, again, we went over what OCD looks like, what it feels like, what the texture of it is, regardless of content. Getting ERP care is super, super important. And you can still get care for other things like trauma or attachment. We go to a cardiologist for a heart. We go to a neurologist for a brain. We'll see an endocrinologist for our pancreas. Us therapists work the same way. Some of us specialize in some things and other things. And so you can supplement as needed. But yeah, the overlap primarily would be the anxiety and the insecurity around the unknown in relationships.
I'm so
Yeah,
glad you
I
brought in
think,
that trauma piece for Caitlin too, and that's so significant. And no, go ahead. I would love to hear.
Oh yeah. No, I was just gonna say, there has been some research on attachment style in ROCD, and so they did find that like people with anxious attachment styles tend to have more obsessions related to relationships. And if you think about like, anxious attachment, right? Like that makes sense then why somebody might worry frequently about like, does this person like me enough, or does this person love me? Is this person gonna leave, right? Um, if it's somebody with like an avoidant attachment style, that might be like that whole idea of like, do I even want to be in this relationship? What if I feel stuck and locked in, right? Like, what if this is a bad decision and like I just don't want to, like, what if I regret it because I feel suffocated after a while, right? And so if you think about it, right, ERP, like OCD treatment at large can kind of address also like those underlying fears of like giving you evidence that just because that's sort of like your attachment style, or to kind of like pull from like the schema world, like that might be like like one of your schemas, and like you might act in like one of those modes typically, right? It doesn't have to be the only way you act, right? It doesn't have to rule your life. You can, that's sort of how you can, like, if you want to think trans orientation wise, right? Like doing exposures where you make those steps towards towards incorporating that level of uncertainty and doubt and sort of not knowing the outcome, right? And then like doing it anyway, like that's secure attachment, right? Like if I do this, am I going to be okay? Right? You do the exposure not knowing how it's going to turn out. That's secure attachment right there. Right? That's what kids with secure attachment do. They kind of like walk on their own, knowing that they can fall back, right? Knowing that they can handle it internally. So, and that's really what ERP is, right? It's like we try to instill in people like, you know what, like this uncertainty, this distress is scary. It is really scary. It's really hard, and you can handle it. Yeah.
And you deserve to do that and to be able to get your life back.
Right.
I mean, that's big. That was such a great description, and it goes actually a lot, I think, into Rachel's question at 746. Rachel says, I have an obsession around a friend abandoning me, and this results in reassurance seeking and rumination exposure ideas. So I wonder, and we always, of course, recommend that you work with a licensed clinician and an ERP specialist to really develop that hierarchy in a way that's helpful for you. But I wonder if y'all have any suggestions on what exposures in this case might look like.
Yeah. Caryn, do you want to jump in, or do you want
I could. I mean, it's hard because like obviously we don't know the ins and outs of your experiences. But I mean, I always say like if you notice that you're doing any sorts of like evaluations or analyzing like how is my friend responding, or like do I need like rehearsing like what you're going to say to this friend, or maybe even like avoiding spending time with them, or kind of like excessively researching other people they're spending time with. Like I always say, like, start with response prevention as the exposure. Like I think that's usually like a good place to start, because you're going to want to reduce and eliminate those compulsions anyway. So yeah.
I think I feel like that's a really foundational starting point, because at the end of the day, that response prevention, I always say that's the real magic. People get really excited about the exposure part of exposure therapy because I could say it's kind of like the jazz hands. It's like, ooh, what's that going to be like? But the real work is being done in response prevention. So I completely agree. One of the things I really like to do is better understand some of the core fears when it comes to any format of relationship of OCD, romantic or non-traditional. So, is there a fear that the abandonment is going to happen because I'm not good enough, or I'll never be able to have another relationship that is as close or as significant? And then we'll do exposure work around that core fear too, because my guess is this might not be the first time this has happened for you. OCD loves to jump and weave and keep us sort of guessing. And so maybe there's been other significant relationships where you've had that same fear. And so working with your ERP therapist or with some kind of some person who specialized in this to be able to help you kind of better understand what is the core fear that OCD is going after in this, and then really doing exposures around that. Script writing is great for that. But then it can be as simple as, what if you, and obviously it's up to the person's comfort level of letting their friend know that they're doing this kind of therapy and this is the thing they're working through, but whether you let them know or not. One of my favorites is like, don't hold the door for them when you're walking through a door together, or like accidentally hang up first while they're mid-sentence. Obviously, this is person to person and it's dependent on what the fears are, but the exposures can be both very straightforward, very simple, or very creative. And if you can get at some core fear work too, you'll probably find that you're really getting at whatever OCD is going after, no matter.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you pulled in the core fear component too. And that's, I know, so hard for us to answer without knowing what that exactly looks like in Rachel's case, but that's so helpful. Caryn, it looked like, did you have one more thing to add?
I don't know.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to say something. Okay, never mind. It's fine.
I might have.
Okay. So going, I think we're talking about lots of different types of relationships, and Annie at 750 has a great question. And Annie says, I'm trying to figure out how to help my 13-year-old son with his friendships. He has OCD. He's made fun of. He ruminates about what he needs to do differently to not lose his friends. And first of all, Annie, I'm so sorry that your son is going through that, and that you're also going through that, I know, alongside him. And that is so tough. And this brings up, of course, this specific question, but also the larger question of how do we support our loved ones in the midst of these things that are so challenging. So I'll open it up at Caryn or Carly, whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I just feel so much for Annie. Being a parent, so it's so intuitive to want to jump in and fix and perfect or find a solution for your kid. And honestly, that's great parenting, except for when OCD is in the mix. And so that is one of the toughest things to have. So I focus on a lot of child and family work in my work with OCD, but also at large. My specialization has always been with children and family systems. And so, Annie, what I would suggest first, because when you can role model this, you're teaching your son so much. If you can catch yourself, I always talk with the supporters I work with, our compulsion is over supporting, fixing, accommodating. So if you can catch yourself when you find yourself kind of maybe in an anxious whirlwind, even being vulnerable about that with your son, wow, I'm really finding that I'm having a hard time with rumination right now, because rumination is not singular to OCD. And I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm going to go work my skills right now. You don't need to tell him it's about his situation. You're role modeling a lot of what he needs to be working on too. But it is not easy to kind of hang back and let him work through this stuff. But one of the best ways I think that supporters can support their loved ones is being a mirror when it comes to using their ERP. So for instance, if she thinks that he's ruminating or that he's having an OCD moment, having some kind of collaborative method that he's okay with you kind of inquiring, hey, is that OCD bully getting in the way? I wonder, what should we do with that? What was that thing that your therapist was talking about last week? Get curious, but let them take the lead. And I also think that one of the best ways to help, especially with kids, feel less othered by their mental health diagnosis is to try to engage them with communities that get it. So like the OCD camp coming up is a great resource. There is so many great different spaces and YouTube that I love Natasha Daniels. I was just on with one of my kiddos that I work with and send him Nathan Peterson's YouTube website because he's got such great stuff there. Anywhere and everywhere that you can get him engaged with other kids who have OCD, he's going to feel really validated by that experience and also maybe encouraged even by his ERP. And when he's ruminating like that, maybe you, again, role model. I know what it's like to ruminate. It's so frustrating when our brains get sticky like that. But what I'm working on right now, we always bring it back to ourselves to role model. What I'm working on right now is recognizing it's a sticky thought and choosing to do something different, giving it less of my attention, less of my power. It's not a perfect fix, and that's the difficult part, because that's what parents want to do. They want to fix it. But it's worth it because you're providing him lifelong skills. You're providing him not just OCD skills, lifelong skills in that respect.
Yeah. And I think also like normalizing, like sometimes kids are mean, right? Like, and it hurts, especially when you're 13, because like he's an adolescent and like it's developmentally appropriate to want to belong. It's like the most, like, it's like the Ericksonian task of adolescence. It's like what teenagers should do, right? Is want to belong to a peer group. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that just underscores the importance of finding community with people who understand what it's like, but then also like really like gassing him up, like build him up when, like, aside from the OCD, right? Like what else is there to him? I'm sure he's not just OCD, right? Like he also probably, like see if you can kind of encourage and really nurture that part of him too, while then, obviously to kind of echo what Carly was saying, right? If there's any compulsions that, you might play a role in, or if you can like help support him in not doing them, right? That's also super important. Yeah.
I love all of that. And just for folks who are listening, I know Skyla behind the scenes can find for us the links to OCD Kids Camp coming up, and also Anxiety in the Classroom. And I think the camp aspect is so great. And we usually have an event kind of like Caryn's talking about, of even around that, the idea that you're so much more than your OCD, and diving into the things that are meaningful and important to you. But we really do feel for you, Annie, and just I hope you hear that it is not always perfect. I know supporting someone with OCD, and it can be so hard to not offer reassurance or accommodation, but any ways that you're responding in line with his treatment, you're doing out of love, and you're supporting him to be the best version of him. And I hope you also take up some of those opportunities, like the OCD Kids Camp or the upcoming virtual conference this weekend, because you can connect with other parents who are also maybe going through that same thing. So that would be a great place to engage.
I think also the in-person conference, which is in San Francisco, I want to say next year.
Next July, San Francisco.
Yeah, it was. We went to the in-person one in Denver this past year, and it was just like lovely to see all these like kids and teenagers just like bonding and really finding community and feeling really like good about themselves. And yeah, it was really sweet, really like a beautiful thing. So if you're able to, that's also a thing. But there also might be like local organizations depending on where you're at, and things like that. So
yeah, local affiliates are a great place to plug into. That I don't know. I always say I feel like I'm probably partial, but I think the OCD community is literally the coolest community of humans to connect with wherever you are. So all the things. So we have Pacey Guy at let's see, at 7:51, and we've had a few questions kind of around this of obsessions around maybe what a romantic partner has done in the past, or obsessions around them having other friends or other relationships. And how do we not continue to maybe ruminate on those things or try to figure those things out? So I wonder how we might respond to that, along with a little further down, we go into feeling like, well, can I not be in this relationship because they have other attachments or other friends? So how might we respond to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Caryn.
I mean, it's tricky because it's not so much about like future possibilities. I mean, maybe it is, right? I think that's where it might be helpful to talk to somebody in more detail about that. But it's sort of like that retroactive sort of jealousy type of obsession. I haven't seen this like too much personally in my own practice, but the few times that I have, right, we've really taken very much like like what kind of relationship do you want to have with this person? And to kind of echo what we were talking about earlier in this discussion, can you have that kind of relationship if you are trying to constantly do away with those uncomfortable feelings, right? In order to have that kind of relationship and be the kind of, partner that you want to be to this girl, right? That might entail not, bringing up the past, or not, whatever kinds of compulsions you end up doing. And kind of like really prioritizing that, like acting out of your values, and not necessarily just out of your desire to not feel the stress, right? So I don't know if that helps, but
That's
tough.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caryn. Yeah, and go ahead, Carly.
No, I mean, I agree with Caryn wholeheartedly. I think in a situation like this, the first thing I'd be curious about is value-based work. Like, what does this person, PC guy, how do you perceive relationships at large? What kind of relationship do you want for yourself? But then I'm going to tag that back to something that Caryn said a bit ago. Relationships are inherently uncertain. One of the things that I always bring up in relationship OCD work, again, relationships at large, non-romantic and romantic alike, is you got two human beings with their own atmospheres. It's inherently uncertain. Like, what I'm going through in context to what my husband is going through, in context to what my sister is going through, how I'm perceiving a moment versus how they're perceiving a moment. We are our own universes. And so we are incapable of being able to know exactly how a person is working through, feeling through, dealing through a moment, whether it be about the past relationship, a current one. So really, at the end of the day, this comes down to uncertainty about maybe what the past means, what association we have with that meaning, what current relationships mean, and wanting to get control over that. I'd ask PC to consider, do you feel just constantly kind of in a frenzied panic state? Because my guess is, yeah, to some degree, because trying to chase that uncertainty is just going to create more discomfort, because that well is too deep. There's nothing that will satiate that well. And so going back to that value-based work, if a relationship that you are interested in having with someone looks like mutual respect and love and meeting the moment where it's at, that inherently means also working towards leaning into uncertainty, being more comfortable with the discomfort that comes along with it. So I'd probably bounce around all the spaces that Caryn was talking about, and then also kind of bring that into tow.
It could also be uncertainty regarding, like, not even like what, like, can I trust her? Like, if that might be it, but it could also be like uncertainty over, like, will I ever get over the disgust aspect, right? Like, kind of like the shoulds, like I think in some forms of relationship OCD, there's like the idea of like, well, I should feel a certain way, right? I should feel a certain way, or like this relationship should have been perfect, right? It should be picturesque and fairy tale, and I should have been the only guy in her life, or whatever it is. And again, like kind of thinking, okay, like that's the feeling in the moment, and like what is it that you want long term? How does that should get in the way of your relationship and how you're interacting with them right now? So yeah, I think like sometimes uncertainty, like that term kind of can like gloss over like the uncertainty of like, can I handle this like feeling, this not just right feeling? And so I always just like to point that out, because the few times that I've seen like retroactive jealousy, it's typically been more like just that anger and disgust, and like that feeling of like, I can't get over it. I just can't get over it. And not even like, it's not like necessarily a future-based fear in terms of that. But yeah, that's tough. It's tough. But I mean, I always say, okay, like what kind of boyfriend do you want to be? What kind of partner do you want to be? How are your behaviors actually like interfering with that? Yeah.
That. And again, very values based. Okay, what in the midst of all of these feelings, what are we going to continue to do with the things that we care about and with our relationships?
Sure.
I know a little bit further down, we've had some folks asking if we'll have other OCD themes going on. Yes, absolutely. We have town halls and live streams going on all the time. So you are more than welcome to continue to check back in. And there are things happening constantly, both with IOCDF, and I also know NoCD has streams going on all the time. So both YouTube channels with all of the above, y'all can check on. But we also have a great question from Megan, and who a little further down says that you don't know if any of the comments are technically ROCD, and they totally are, because tonight what we're focusing on is the fact that any relationship related OCD can be ROCD, not just romantic. It can take on all different forms. So to read through, Megan, starting at 7:55, says, great discussion. I came late. I would love more discussions about couples in which one has OCD and the other has ASD or is in the autism spectrum. Started realizing I have some ROCD after I was married. And if we continue down a little bit further for some more context, at 7:58, it says, my OCD also latches on to fears about raising my child and my stepchildren with my husband. I'm a stay-at-home mom and my husband works more than full-time from home. It's hard to notice if I'm avoiding or taking a needed break at times. He more than helps when he's able and willingly takes over parenting decisions whenever I seem to have a breakdown. We both agree that me talking with him about this are usually compulsions. I know there's a lot of different dynamics going on here, from OCD to ASD to having a child that OCD is latching on to kind of this reassurance piece. I wonder, Caryn or Carly, if you have any advice on any of those things that Megan might be navigating.
You know, the thing that caught my eye first was the question about being someone who lives with OCD and then your loved one being on the spectrum. Autism spectrum disorder is what ASD stands for. And, you know, I think that I just want to bring that back to inherently being in a relationship with another person is uncertain, and everyone has their own atmosphere. Everyone has their own needs. Maybe that helps normalize too, that like, I've got my thing, he's got his thing, and we're just going to work our very best at taking care of ourselves so we can take care of our relationship as best together. So, you know, trying to normalize that there's no such thing as being a perfect partner on either side. And regardless of what kinds of obstacles, tribulations that you guys go through, you guys still can take care of yourselves to then take care of the relationship. It sounds like there's a lot of like, I always imagine like a web. Like maybe there's like a kind of a focal point that the web sort of focuses on, but then it goes outward. And so I'm hearing that with maybe the babe, the little kid, maybe that's in relation to like duties and how they are levied up in the household and things like that. And that's OCD's favorite magic trick, is to web out and to come up with lots of different sticky points. But it all tends to kind of come down to a very similar focus, not necessarily a core fear, but a similar focus or theme. So if you are working with an ERP therapist, if you are doing ERP, kind of getting a better sense of what your OCD goes after. I want to validate too. I think one of the really difficult parts about relationship OCD and relationships at large, again, is that there are going to be times where some of what you are sticky to is also realistic. Like it's realistic, and maybe it actually even needs some focus. Maybe there's something in the relationship that could use some work. There's something in the family system or household that could use some work. Those two things can coexist. And I know I always like freak people out when I say that, because they're like, okay, so what do I do now? You don't go at the pace that OCD wants you to. If there's one thing you don't do, it's you do not respond with urgency. Take it one step at a time, 1 hour at a time. OCD hates that. And inherently, when you slow that pace down, you start working out, getting a better sense of your sticky points, and you don't respond with urgency, you're actually already doing ERP a lot. You are responding differently inherently. So that'd be like a real overview of kind of where I'd start with someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also kind of like there's this idea, like if you feel compelled to do something. So I know you mentioned first comment, something about like taking a nap or like taking a break and like questioning, like, is this avoidance? Is this like a very like reasonable thing that parents need sometimes, right? I think anxiety has a way of making people second guess things, from ranging from like, did I close the door all the way to, am I making the right decision in terms of taking this nap, right? I think if you like, there's always like that idea of like, well, like you might never have like that right answer. And then also like, if you feel like you absolutely cannot take a nap or take a break or whatever because XYZ, if there's like that feared consequence that is like when you say it out loud and it feels really kind of like, well, how did I get there? How did I make that leap from I need to take a break to I'm a terrible mom or, you know, whatever it is, right? I would pause and kind of examine, okay, like if I feel like I have to do something, maybe that's a sign I should take a break, and or maybe that's a sign I should do the opposite, or kind of question, you know, like that. I think it's sort of like if I feel like I have to do something, that's when I need to do the opposite. If I feel like I could take it or leave it, then that's when I'm truly experiencing that psychological flexibility that is so important. Yeah.
Thank you, Caryn and Carly and Megan. Thank you for such a great question and for your willingness to share what you're experiencing in your life and with your family. And we really appreciate it. And I know that I'm sure others connect to parts of your story and are appreciative of your willingness to share. Right. I wanted to pull in one more kind of different component that was up from a long time ago that that actually related to faith. And it's interesting because our last faith and OCD roundtable, we talked about specifically relationships and religious scrupulosity, where this definitely can all weave together as OCD likes to do. It does not separate out into themes. It's just whatever's important to you. So Erica at 723 says, for me, it had to do with God punishing me with my son. It was a dark time for me. He was almost 2 years old, such a sad, conflicting time as a mom. And Erica, thank you for sharing that. I know that definitely scrupulosity, whether it's with romantic relationships or familial relationships or any relationship, can really intersect. And I wonder, either Caryn or Carly, if you've had experience with that in your practice and how to kind of navigate that with someone where there's this ROCD component, but also this scrupulosity component.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like I could jump in. I mean, I think like this is a really great example of how sometimes like subtypes can mix, right? Like there could be an element of scrupulosity. And then also like how it latches on to things that are really meaningful and like vital and crucial to somebody's identity and like their self-concept. You know, so for a lot of people, it's, you know, if you have a child, right, it's like, I want to be a good mom. And if you do have like a faith, right, like a religion that you try to adhere to, like that makes sense, then that it kind of creates like a Frankenstein of an OCD theme. I remember at conference, somebody somebody who attended the talk mentioned how like their OCD really latched on to like, is my relationship with God okay? You know, will it ever be the same because I had this moment of doubt or this moment of, you know, kind of questioning God. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really kind of course, like it'll latch on to things that are important to you, because that's why I think that also explains why like that kind of tug from the obsessions can feel so much more real compared to other people's themes, right? Because like for you, like that is the most important aspects of your identity, of your life. You know, so I don't know if that answers. I guess it wasn't really a question, but yeah, I just kind of on that.
Talking about where this comes into play, and I can have Skyla drop in the chat too, where we had this longer conversation on ROCD and scrupulosity, because I think this comes up a lot. And whether, Caryn, it could be even your relationship with God, and this am I having the right relationship with God? Is this the relationship I'm supposed to have? Or it could be, well, what if I'm sinning, and what if that impacts my child? Or what if the relationship that I'm in romantically or with a friend isn't with someone of the same faith tradition? And what if that means God is mad at me? What if that means I can't engage in this relationship? There's so many ways that this comes up, and just want folks to hear, if you're experiencing that, your OCD doesn't have to fit neatly in a box, that you can still work with a specialist in ERP for all of these issues. So Carly, did you have anything to add to the scrup or ROCD piece?
Well, I always just think that, so OCD loves to latch on to things that we have high values for. But I think that when we talk about Scroop in particular in this intersection of such a significant relationship, but also like those are two very significant relationships, your relationship with God, if that is your faith, like that is a hugely important relationship, intersecting with your son, another massive relationship. It is just really, those are high value bank spaces. And so I try to really kind of use that externalization factor with people when it comes to skill building. What a manipulative bully to go after two things that you value and love so deeply. And what is the antithesis of fear and responding to fear with avoidance? It's love. It's going towards it. It's choosing to hope. I love working with individuals on hope, especially around Scroop, moral existentialism, because I truly think it's like one of the biggest exposures out there, because it inherently means to be willing to move forward openly, but with a positive regard. And that is risky. It's a risky thing to do. So yeah, I just feel so much for you, Erica, because I imagine it was a really deeply dark time. I hope you're feeling like you've been giving OCD a run for its money and letting it know who's boss. Yes. Yeah. I always think about how high of a value bank and also how manipulative that bully and that OCD can be, to take two things like that, your faith and then these significant relationships. When you put it in context that way, it's just a bully. You just got to tell the bully who's boss.
Totally. Yeah.
And just to, this is, thank you all so much. And OCD is a bully. And it just, frankly, there's lots of words I shouldn't say on the stream about OCD. It's just not, thank you, stream, but it's not particularly nice. But we get to fight back. And just one more kind of question from the chat, and then we're going to do some kind of final thoughts. But I did want to loop back. The trauma question came up a little bit earlier. And I know, Carly, you started to address that, but this trauma piece of, well, when there is trauma that's actually involved in our OCD, how might we respond to that? And Caryn, I just wanted to loop back to you to see if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think I guess it's just also like a more general concern that like therapists might not know how to handle trauma, because trauma can feel so, oftentimes I guess by definition, trauma is rooted in like a real life event, right? There's something that terrible that happened that led to kind of these like reactions and the flashbacks and all these changes in somebody's life. I think if you were to kind of conceptualize trauma and anxiety, anxiety, OCD, like the common threads are like that sense of avoidance and wanting to not feel triggered, right? And not feel overwhelmed, right? And so I think that's why it's super helpful to work with somebody who's skilled in treating OCD, because like I think one of the things like a good OCD therapist would do is to not flood you, right? And to really be aware of when people are struggling and maybe dissociating or having flashbacks or maybe veering into things that aren't helpful, right? We're flexible, right? We can kind of scale things back in that moment. And I think that's a really helpful thing to kind of remember. And then also, there's also this idea, I was talking to somebody recently about this, about how sometimes people can have coexisting trauma and OCD, or coexisting trauma and, other anxiety disorders. And it's sort of like, okay, like what is causing the bigger fire in their house, right? Like if you think about it as like there's different fires, right? Where is the source of the fire? What do we need to put out first? And for some people, just to be able to function in their lives, it's to do ERP or to do OCD treatment, and then address the trauma afterwards. And or sometimes there's generalizable skills as well from ERP, right? Like I can handle these uncomfortable sensations. I can handle facing my fears, right? Those are things that you would experience hopefully in trauma treatment anyway, right? And so I think it's helpful to kind of think of it as like not all distress is bad. Some of it is really helpful to experience. Because the last thing we would want is for somebody to not want to do OCD treatment because they're afraid of feeling triggered, right? So Yeah, just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's passionate about this, I know this is a big topic in the community right now, and there's a lot of research happening around this connection and trauma and OCD and treatment. So there is an IOCDF special interest group dedicated to that that's starting to grow right now. So y'all can feel free to reach out if that's something that you would like to be a part of.
Totally.
In closing out tonight, before we wrap up, I just want to ask some final thoughts, and y'all can go any direction you want. But I really want to ask, if somebody walked, or I guess not necessarily, well, maybe walked in. A lot of times things are virtual now, but if somebody jumped onto your screen or walked into your office and said like, how could I possibly accept uncertainty about my relationship when it is the most important thing to me? How could you possibly ask me to do that if somebody's in that space? Do you have a piece of advice that you would give them as a part of their treatment? Go ahead, Carly.
I was going to say, I've had that exact question posed to me, sometimes in a very frustrated manner, which is necessary. It is necessary to sometimes like let your therapist know how frustrated you are with the work you're doing. That's a really good therapy work, great alliance work. What advice have I given? What I give? How could I? You're right. How could I? It's terrifying what I'm asking you to do. I'm the first one to admit that, but I'm asking you to do it because you came and you said you wanted change. You said that you wanted OCD not to be the driver in the driver's seat, that you wanted to take the lead with your relationships. And this is the best way to do it. And also, do you like what OCD has provided you in the context of relationships? If the answer is no, all right, why not? Let's try something different and see what happens.
Yeah.
You go ahead. I love that, Carly. Go ahead, Caryn.
Yeah, I mean, there's that idea of like, if you want to never feel that level of uncertainty or that level of fear, distress, like you could just avoid and dump all of your relationships and end all your relationships and live in a bunker, right? And sadly, people do that, right? That is a possibility, but is that the life you want? It's like OCD, kind of like identifying like, what has OCD taken from me? What am I willing to do to get those things back? And it's sort of like, there's the good things don't normally come easily in life, right? There is some level of risk and hope, right? I think risk and hope are two sides of the same coin. Every time we step outside of our doors, right, we open ourselves up to that, but there's also so much more that we can experience when we do that too. So it's kind of like, well, what other options do you have? Right.
And I hope that everybody on here tonight kind of felt that sense of hope. And I know all OCD themes can be hard, right? Because it's for you personally, whatever is the most important to you. But I hope y'all hear that there is this sense of hope and that you are not alone, that we are in community together, leaning into uncertainty, even if it's the thing that's the most important to you, because that's how we have a shot at this big, beautiful, awesome life that you were created to live. And there are so many more opportunities to connect with community and to get resources on topics like this as you continue to move towards hope and towards values. So I would encourage y'all tomorrow to join OCD experts and clinicians Liz Mackingvale and Chris Tronston at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the first Ask the Experts of November. You can submit questions ahead of time at iocdf.org/peace of mind. And also, I am so excited. The online OCD conference is like this weekend, this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I know I'm going to be there presenting. I know we have so many amazing folks who will be there doing lots of events and presentations. All of that content will be available for 60 days following the event for those who register. So please visit onlineocdconference.org to learn more and to register. And finally, this live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule of future streams at iocdf.org/peace of mind. And you can also view recordings of past live streams, as well as watch our hosts answer your pre-submitted questions on our new OCD mailbag on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. Finally, remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled. And if you need resources, you can visit iocdf.org. So we are so glad that y'all spent your Tuesday evening with us, or Tuesday, whatever time it is, wherever you're located and watching from. And thankful to the IOCDF, to Skyla behind the scenes, but also to our awesome panelists, Caryn and Carly and Jenna, who we love, was with us on and off and in spirit. And as we close out, again, I hope y'all know that you are not alone and that there is so much hope. So please hear that from us, and please continue to come back and see us at future events. Have a good night.
Thank you.